Pinnacle Safety Solution for all things safety.
Hello, my name is Beverly Rouse and I'm the principal for Pinnacle Safety Solutions, a health and safety consultancy company based here in Barbados. So this particular topic that I'm going to deal with today is risk assessment. Now we're all familiar with risk and trying to manage risk, business risk, and putting things in place to mitigate in the event of something happening that you foresee or in some instances unforeseen. And particularly with the pandemic, globally, it would appear that it was unforeseen. Certainly the planning stages and the business continuity element, for a lot of people, they were blindsided. But that doesn't mean starting back business, it will be business as usual, because clearly you'll now have to be looking at things as it relates to the risk of anything going wrong whilst the project is up and running. And I'm sure many of you can think of horrendous stories or bring to mind horrendous stories where you failed to manage the risk and as a result it's cost you quite dearly. So as we're talking about risk, the key points really are, firstly, there's a legal requirement. Under our Safety and Health Act 2005, there is a legal requirement to devise risk assessment. And devising risk assessment means that you have to look for foreseeable risks as it relates to your activities and put in place controls that are proportionate to the risk that you identify. So the SURE Act spells out that you have to have a risk assessment, and in saying that, obviously you need to have it written down somewhere. Now some of you might say, well, I have not been able to write anything down. Well, we're now in the age of technology where you can actually use your phone to record information, which we would then pass on to the relevant people for whom the risk controls you've put in place for. So our legislation says you've got to do a risk assessment. So of course, coming out of that, you've got to have a plan. And generally, international standards, we talk about having a construction site plan. Now, it doesn't have to be anything elaborate, but you need to actually identify the things that you're going to have to manage that have not been designed out by the architect. So you're going to have something written down, or alternatively, in terms of evidence, you can use your phone, a WhatsApp, a short clip that you can give to those people on site that are directly affected. The second thing is, it's good business sense. I mean, you're not going to start a project without first having insurance in place, and certainly the purpose of you building the project is to make some money out of it. Well, if you're not managing the risk, the likelihood is that it will have to come out of your bottom line, anything that you've not managed that the insurance company won't then pay for. So it makes good business sense to have risk controls in place to enable you to manage what's going on site. Remember, the site is extremely dynamic and things are changing all the time. So you really need to have somebody that is on top of their game as it relates to how to manage business risk. And I generally say, when I'm delivering training or indeed managing projects on site, when you walk to site, you look up, down, left, right, behind and inside, because if you don't do that, you won't be able to manage risks in the way that you would expect, because you haven't examine the site thoroughly to identify where there's likely to be areas that could present risks to people later on down the line, and or to equipment, which of course there is a cost for that as well. And then of course the third key point is that you've got a moral obligation, a duty of care, both statutorily under the Act and then at common law, which of course is judge-made law. So we've all got a duty for one another. So the key points are looking at the legal requirements, what's the law asking you to do, and the law's asking you to write a risk assessment. You can do that, as I said, by recording it on the phone, video recording, however you choose to do it, but you do need to record it. Then you've got to look at it in terms of good business sense. You'll have insurance. The insurance will only pay out for certain elements of things that go wrong. The rest of it's going to come out of your bottom line. And then finally, the duty of care. You've got a general duty of care for anybody that comes to your site, and then the law requires you to have a duty of care. So those are the key points as it relates to putting risk assessment together. I generally say that the steps are identifying the hazards, and identifying the hazards, which is of course the work activity. It could be slipping, tripping, it could be electrical, anything that's going to cause physical trauma. And then of course you could be looking at health and well-being. So for health, for example, if someone presents unwell, particularly in the pandemic, situation that we find ourselves in. What are you going to put in place as it relates to that? So identify the hazards as it relates to the work activities, which, as I said, it's a dynamic site and it's changing all the time. So that would mean you have to be constantly checking the site, reviewing and communicating with those people who are going to be undertaking the work, because there may be some emergency work that crops up that you hadn't planned for or wasn't necessarily foreseen. So it's that constant engagement with the people on site, the contractors, the subcontractors, the engineers, that constant communication, that constant dialogue that will enable you to manage the risks on site effectively. Then of course you've got to decide who's at risk. And deciding who's at risk is not just the contractors, the engineers, it could be anybody coming to site. If they're coming to site, you need to make sure that they've been given enough information as it relates to the risk that you've identified and the controls that you've put in place. So deciding who's at risk is not necessarily just the contractors, delivery drivers, stock that you're receiving on site, the authorised personnel, the Labour Department, the Fire Authority. All of those people need to be considered when you're talking about who might be at risk as a result of the activities going on site. Then you've got to estimate who is at risk, estimate the level of risk, and generally we talk about it perhaps in simplistic terms: high, medium or low risk. What's the probability of something going wrong? And if there's a high risk, then clearly you need to be putting some controls in place that can eliminate the hazard, or indeed try to control the hazard by other means, engineering, administrative controls, or a combination of all of them. And that kind of leads to the evaluation component. You may well not have anything, or you may well just be focusing on what we generally see as PPE. Well, PPE, personal protective equipment, is the last line of defence, and you're relying on people to wear it. So you really need to look at controls that are robust in terms of managing the risk, with PPE being the last element of your control measures. But remember, it could be a combination of all of those. And then of course you are going to look at recording, and I mentioned at the beginning that you can record that by actually writing it down and or using some audio platform to record what you've actually put in place. And then of course you're going to look at reviewing. Well, you'll review it based on if an incident has taken place resulting in an accident, or perhaps you've been given some additional information from an external source which is relevant to your site activities. It could be as a result of any audits or inspections that have taken place that would warrant reviewing the assessment. But it's important that you have a record of what you have done, so that will support you moving forward. So in summary, we're looking at risk assessment. You need to think about the legal requirements, what the law is asking you to do. Secondly, it's good business sense to put things in place to save on your bottom line and not impact on your insurance in a negative way, resulting in increased premium. And then of course you've got a moral duty and a legal duty to put controls in place, mitigation, to ensure that you're managing foreseeable risks. If you want more information or expansion on the information that I've given you, by all means feel free to contact me on 246 288 2053 or 547 7336, and email info@pinnaclesafetysolutions.org. Thank you.